Airdrop farming on all the Ethereum layer 2s has been booming lately, and the amount of ETH locked on the network is double that the amount it was last year around the same time. And if you combine all the transactions per second on all the layer 2s, you'll get 45 or so over the last week, which is 4 times that it is on Ethereum. So that is quite good news in general for the crypto industry, such high activity. However, there are some concerns I have. Arbitrum and Optimism are both optimistic type rollups, or layer 2s on Ethereum that aim to feel like Ethereum, however have the transaction fees a fraction that they are on Ethereum. And out of the 28 functional L2s, Arbitrum and Optimism account for 85% of the total value locked. So there are some security concerns with this 85% of TVL that I would like to discuss. So let's start with how optimistic rollups work. In an optimistic rollup, validators are called sequencers. Sequencers are responsible for aggregating a bunch of transactions that happened into one batch, and then this batch is processed off-chain, so this is much cheaper than doing it all on-chain. Then they publish one hash of this whole batch to the Ethereum mainnet. Optimistic rollups are indeed optimistic, and they assume that this sequencer or validator is acting in good faith and is honest and therefore executes everything correctly. It would be quite naive or even silly to assume that without any kind of mechanism people are so honest and good and don't have any financial interest. So there is a system in place called fraud proofs that allows to challenge the validators if they are suspected of acting in bad faith or basically being dishonest. So anybody, ideally anybody, can submit a fraud proof that some kind of thing was fraudulent in the transactions, and they raise the alert on the Ethereum mainnet, which is then able to check whether the transactions are indeed correct or not. And if they are not correct, that validator or that sequencer is disqualified. The fraudulent transactions are then reversed, and the person who raised the alert in the first place gets a portion of the terminated funds. So that sounds all good. However, the security model, the whole model, depends on the presence of this fraud proofs and at least one person who is honest and who is maintaining the state of the network and who is checking for all this, and then their hope is that at least one of them submits a fraud proof. So I'm not really going to touch on this assumption. While it is an assumption and it might potentially not always be the case. However, that is just the design of optimistic rollups, and we decided that it was the probability so small that, okay, we are gonna stay with it. Now, there is something in particular with optimism. Optimism is so optimistic that there are no fraud proofs on it deployed. So there is no mechanism to challenge whether a sequencer, a centralized sequencer, is acting always honestly. So, which is concerning, especially considering that there are $2.8 billion locked on Optimism. And speaking of the centralized validator, why are there problems with it and why decentralization is required in here? Firstly, there is a possibility of MEV or the possibility of the validator front-running some transactions. And secondly, if it goes down, your funds are frozen until it goes back up because there is nobody else who is doing this job, and you cannot do it yourself. You have to wait for one validator. Now let's go to the biggest L2 by total value locked, and that is Arbitrum, that has $6 billion on its network. So why so much money in the first place? Well, it has an airdrop in March 2023, and that was also when the peak TPS of 32 was reached, and since then the activity has declined, so the TPS is around 8 these days. So what's the deal with fraud proofs there? Well, they are deployed, which is a tick, good thing. However, you have to be whitelisted to be able to raise an alert, to be able to submit a fraud proof to the Ethereum mainnet. So there are only permissioned actors who can challenge the other centralized sequencer about it, which is kind of concerning to me, and we are kind of diverging away from what we try to do with blockchain and crypto in the first place. And here as well, the sequencer or the validator is just one centralized entity. And again, same problem as with Optimism, the possibility of the MEV or front-running or changing of places of transactions. If you'd like to withdraw your funds and the validator is down, that is not possible because there is just one validator. I don't mean to be negative and just diss all the L2s and the whole system, I truly believe that it's a good thing. And even if those people who are generating all these transactions are airdrop farmers or multi-accounts, it just shows interest and that people are willing to invest their time and their money into the cryptocurrency as an industry. So that's generally is good. However, what I'm suggesting is that firstly, we ensure that the security of those funds that people are investing is in place, and secondly, that we are trying to decentralize it a little bit more. And what do we do now, basically? Well, the idea is to kind of try to use maybe different L2s at least until the fraud proofs are implemented. And it's also generally very good to use multiple L2s instead of having 85% of all the money locked in two, because the more transactions on the L2s, the gas fees on them also increase. So the whole purpose of the L2 decreases, the cost effectiveness is still smaller. So what are the action items you can get from this video? Firstly, use Arbitrum over Optimism. And yes, it does have fraud proofs at least, even if it is whitelisted actors. And then secondly, try to use either ZK rollups or Validium type rollups or any kind of other optimistic rollups that are on the later stages of development. So if we go onto the website l2beat.com, which is the main website I took the information for this video from, there is an overview of all the active projects and L2s, and it outlines the risks with each of them. So there is Immutable X, which doesn't have too bad of a risk profile. And then Starknet has quite a few concerns. ZK Sync has very few security concerns in comparison. Yeah, ZK Sync Lite, to be precise, actually. And yes, I would really be careful with OP mainnet. And ZK Sync Aware as well. They all have some kind of risks associated with them apart from Digate, and I don't really know this one in particular. Apparently it's built on a Looprings code base. And then there is also Fuel version 1, which is an optimistic rollup, which doesn't have any risks associated with it, at least according to this website, L2Beat. However, I'm not a coder myself, so if I said something wrong or if you think this website is total trash, you can correct me in the comments, I would appreciate it. And I hope your funds stay safe, and that's all I have for you, and see you in the next one.